Welcome, welcome to another episode of The Shaman's Wife. I hope you're enjoying this mini-series with my dear friend Alicia. And of course, if you want to find out more about Alicia, or more about me, or more about the Heads Together podcast, go to the show notes. There will be all the links you need. And if you haven't already, I urge you to pre-order your copy, or if you're listening to this when the book has now been published, order your copy of The Shaman's Wife. This is a transformational book, and I'm so honored to have Alicia with me for this mini-series where we are diving into the background to this powerful memoir. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Heads Together podcast. I'm Jill Mokes, and I am obsessed with cutting through the noise when it comes to growing your business. Each week, via intimate coaching conversations and inspirational stories, I share what it really takes to get the results you want in a way that feels right to you. I am all about attracting higher ticket opportunities, building authentic relationships, and creating the abundant, full-fat version of your dream business. I mean, how many of us have beavered away creating a light version of what we really want? The thing is, I honestly believe when you're outstanding at what you do, there is no limit to what you can achieve. So, are you ready to put our heads together and make it happen? Let's go. Alicia, welcome back for our 7th and final recorded episode of the podcast. We're going to go live together shortly, but we'll pop a link in the show notes to when that will be. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. I love our conversations.
So do I. I absolutely love them. I think our conversation last week on spirituality was just, I felt afterwards, I could feel myself wanting to expand, like really open my arms out wide. And I think good, deep conversation like that, meaningful connection like we have when we talk about those kind of things, doesn't it make you feel so open? Yeah, I loved it. So thank you for that. If you're listening to this episode, do go back, listen to this little mini series from episode 1, because Alicia in every episode has brought us some absolute thought-provoking and soul-satisfying conversation. So do go back and listen if you haven't heard all of the episodes yet. Alicia, in this episode, we are going to dive into the topic of forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really interested to hear where you would like us to kind of start with that topic, but I'm also interested in the title of this episode is How to Forgive the Unforgettable, which I think is a really great summing up of the way we often think. If we feel the need to forgive something, yet we know we're never going to forget it, that can be where the real challenge comes in, right? Can you speak a little to that for us?
Short of spoiler alerts,
yeah,
living with a shaman wasn't always great or happy. There was a lot.
Hello. That was an understatement alert also.
There was a lot of darkness. It's easy to dance with the light. It's not so easy to dance with the dark. And so I had to find it within myself to dance with his darkness. And eventually that led to my leaving him and, leaving Ecuador. One of the things that someone said to me who read the book at the end, I'm not going to tell you how it ends, but I came to a place where I could forgive him. And she said to me, how can you forgive him? How can you forgive that? And I said, well, I want to make a distinction. I said, forgiveness is not to excuse him. I don't excuse his behavior or his actions. By no means do I excuse it. I said, but forgiveness is because I understand his suffering, and we all suffer. And that's, I think, a piece of forgiveness, is understanding that when someone creates a transgression against us, they're probably suffering in some way. And it takes an enormous amount of compassion, and we don't always have it. And that's okay, because, we don't. But it takes an enormous amount of compassion to be able to understand that there's suffering behind these transgressions. And I think when you have that understanding, it's a lot easier. It's by no means easy, by the way, but it is easier to forgive someone without excusing them or excusing their behavior or their actions. And there will always be things that you will consider unforgivable. And they may very well always stay in your life as unforgivable. And that's okay, because that's you protecting yourself. It's not that it's a bad thing. It's just, I understand that there are things that are unforgivable for some people. Someone else might be able to forgive it, but maybe you can't. And that's okay as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's interesting, because forgiveness is a choice, isn't it? It's a choice we get to make. We can choose to forgive and we can choose not to forgive. But I think it's a bit like any choice. Whichever choice you make, you are picking all of the consequences of that choice. So if we choose not to forgive, we are choosing to have the discomfort of no resolution, perhaps. So we're picking the consequences. And sometimes when we choose to forgive, we're picking all the consequences of that, which often is about resolution, isn't it? It's about comfort for ourselves, not necessarily about bestowing forgiveness upon someone, but about really reclaiming our own energy and feelings around that person or the transgression that are damaging to us. It's about actually resolving those.
I think when we don't forgive, we carry it with us. We're the ones who are carrying it. The other person isn't carrying it. We're the ones who are carrying it. And it is a conscious choice to forgive or not forgive. But understand that when you don't forgive, we carry it. And it's a burden. It's not something positive. It's a burden that we carry with us. And will permeate our lives in different ways, and maybe sometimes unconsciously. So I don't think I could have written the book if I hadn't forgiven him. As a matter of fact, I would say I could not have written the book if I had not forgiven him. So one of the things around forgiveness that will help is to recalibrate your relationship to that person. There's a transaction or a transgression and someone has hurt your feelings or done something that you feel is inappropriate or whatever, and you want to keep that relationship and you're able to forgive them, you can also, it's not an either or, but you can also set boundaries around that relationship and recalibrate it so you don't feel as vulnerable in that relationship as you were previously. And that's a conscious, intentional decision. I'm going to set these boundaries around this relationship. I'm willing to engage in these things, but not in these things. Boundaries are a way of keeping yourself healthy and whole. And they may aid in your ability to forgive someone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you forgive someone, when you choose to forgive someone, there is absolutely an element of you're doing that for yourself, for your own healing. Do you think it's also a very powerful way of taking back some control of a situation? And I think you're alluding to that really with the boundary setting. It's almost like that recalibrating of the relationship allows you to take back a little of the power, a little bit of the control. And it's this opportunity to start afresh on a very new footing. But that forgiveness kind of has to come first, because without that, there is no relationship to move forward with.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with.
Yeah. Yeah. But your own story with the shaman and I know that we don't want to give away too many spoilers for the story, but suffice to say there was certainly a lot that you had to forgive, or a lot that you were choiced with forgiving. How did you come to the decision that for your sake and in acknowledgement of his suffering, as you said before, that was part of it? How did you come to that decision? Because I feel like forgiving the unforgettable is just not an easy decision to make. And it's also one of those decisions where it's easy to say it, but true forgiveness is an inside job, right? It's a feeling that you have to honor. How did you come to that decision?
Forgiving is not easy, especially what you said, the forgiving the unforgettable, because I don't forget. I remember everything. And when I do, I think that it used to be the first emotion I would feel was anger. And I would not only be angry at him, I was angry at myself for allowing it to happen. And I'll talk a little bit about the self-forgiveness part in a minute. But for me, I think the first thing I felt was anger and rage. And how could this happen to me? Why are you doing this to me? That kind of thing. And I think that's appropriate. I think that's just human. I think it's a process that we have to go through to get to the other side of it. It's not easy to forgive because we don't forget. You can forgive, but it's very unlikely that you'll forget. And one of the things that I did was I had to renegotiate my relationship with him because I was still in Ecuador, even after I left him. So that idea of setting boundaries and recalibrating the relationship and then choosing how I want to engage in it. But I can't really say that any resolution came from him. The resolution came from me. I gave myself resolution. And there are so many times where we don't get a chance to resolve this with someone else for whatever reason. And you have to find a way to forgive yourself first. And resolution comes more from forgiving yourself because that's the starting point, I think. And you will go through anger and you will go through grief. I mean, many times I still experience anger and I still experience grief, but it's like an echo of the grief and the anger I had when it was new.
That makes complete sense. As you were saying that, I was thinking about how you mentioned something just before about how the emotion that comes up changes with forgiveness. Is that really the definition of forgiveness then? Is the definition of forgiveness when internally we finally have a different emotional response to what happened to us? Interesting. Like kind of thinking, I'm not sure forgiveness can ever happen until that happens. So I'm wondering if perhaps that is actually the essence of forgiveness, is choosing a different emotional response to what happened.
That's a really interesting question because I've never thought of it and I've never seen it addressed that way. But what I will say is, like, I think the emotions don't necessarily go away. I think they mellow. They're not as sharp. They're not as clear. There's a softening around those emotions, which is why, I don't think I'll ever get rid of those moments where I still revisit anger and I still revisit grief and resentment and all those things, but they don't stay and they're not stuck in me. And that was the transmuting, if you will, like an alchemy where you take something that's traumatic, because there was trauma for me, and my ability to transmute the negative energy around trauma into something that's gold, which is the wisdom that I acquired about myself and about others and even about shamanism. I couldn't have done that without this idea of forgiveness, to be able to transmute this trauma into something that has a life force and it's generative It's not depleting. It's not destructive, because trauma can be very destructive and just depleting. But now on the other side of the process, which can take as long as it takes, is this idea that now this energy can be generative instead of destructive.
That's a very interesting point. All of the energy that's been going into the anger, the resentment, actually served a purpose. When it transmuted, when the emotions changed, it unlocked something for you. It unlocked some gold that you never would have had access to without the events in the first place. Not that you would ever choose that, but certainly the act of the forgiveness of those events has unlocked something for you. I think there's a real lesson in there for everyone, certainly for me and for everyone listening, which is really about using or taking traumatic events and finding the gold. Could you talk a bit more about that and how we can learn how to do that?
First of all, it's not easy. And like I said before, some things will always remain unforgivable. And that's just the way it is. I think a part of it is creating some distance between the offense or the environment or the offender. I think without that distance, I don't think forgiveness could be possible, because it's a way of disconnecting from the trauma, like physically disconnecting from the trauma, moving away from it, and then finding a way to reconnect to your own wisdom, to your own strength, so that you can forgive. Not only forgive the other, but one of the most difficult things for me was I totally beat myself up afterwards. Like, how could you let this happen? You know, you're this confident entrepreneur. You help people design their lives. You're a professional, blah, 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 all those things. And whoa, how did that happen to me? Why did I allow this to happen? So I took it all on myself, which women do in particular. You know, what I ultimately learned was a narcissistic person. I didn't have a frame of reference for that back then. And anyone who's had narcissistic relationships knows that they're masterful. The narcissists are masterful at having you believe another reality besides your own. And it isn't until you remove yourself and you get some distance that you begin to say, wait a minute, maybe this reality that this person is creating for me is not actually real. And you take back your power that way. And so there is a taking back of your power, but it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. I mean, it's taken me years. You know, there are moments where I get triggered all over again. There are those moments, and you need support to work around those moments, you know, professional support to work around that. So it's not just forgiveness. It's much more complex than that. And forgiveness is a piece of it, but it's also like the distancing, the getting the support, the self-talk where you stop beating yourself up and taking the blame for something that happened. It's all of that wrapped up in one. And then the renegotiation of that relationship, but also there's a renegotiation with your relationship with yourself. And that's the big surprise. Like, oh, I need to renegotiate my relationship with myself and offer myself a little compassion, because I'm great at offering someone else another compassion, but I really suck at offering myself self-compassion. And so there's all of this that's built in. And this is why it takes time and intention, and it's a process, and grace. Give yourself grace, because you want your life to blossom after trauma. You want your life to generate more life, whether it's your creativity, your work, your passion, your family, whatever it is, and not stay stuck in whatever traumatic event happened to you. And for me, the generative part was the book is that. It wouldn't be existing. It wouldn't exist right now if I hadn't been able to change that trauma into something that provides, through my experience, through my journey, provides wisdom and hope and ways that people can transcend their own stories and start writing a new story for themselves. That's really a huge reason why I wrote the book and I put myself out there, because I'm a really private person and I don't like doing that.
I know. Absolutely in service. I just want to ask something. This is a question that I have. This is quite like a personal question of one of the reasons I sometimes struggle with forgiveness is that I detest injustice. And so it's almost like there's a child's voice inside of me that is, well, if I forgive you, it's like you've got away with it, or it's like there's no justice there because you're now forgiven, but you did that thing. And I guess you did speak to that a bit earlier when you were talking about it's not about forgetting and it's not about not holding the person accountable or excusing. It's not about excusing, what I think was the word you used, what the person did. How do we reconcile that? If you're that kind of person, I'm sure other people can relate to what I'm saying here, is that there is like a part of you that feels like, where's the justice? If I forgive you, where's the justice in that?
Yeah, if I forgive you, where is the justice in that? Great question. I kind of think about that in terms of I'm not ever going to get resolution. And if I don't give myself resolution, I am going to carry this with me in this way as a burden for the rest of my life. And I think there's a lot of things that happen in the world where we don't get justice and it's not fair. And we have that conversation like, well, I don't want you to get away with that. I don't want you to get away with that. And if I forgive you, then I'm letting you get away with that. I don't know that if I forgive you, I'm letting you get away with that is true for me, because I don't excuse it. I think it was wrong. I hold that person accountable for it. The bigger question for me is, how far do I want to carry this in my life? And can I work through it in a way that makes me happy in the future? If I don't forgive, and even in the face of, I will never get justice, I will never get back X, Y, and Z that I put into this relationship, whether it's money or energy or time or whatever it is. And if I don't get that back, it's unjust. And it is.
And it is.
I'm not saying it's not. It is unjust, but what do I want to do with that? How far do I want to carry that? And I think that's where I end up with that question, because hate begets hate. Injustice, if I sit in it and I say, I don't want you to get away with it, the emotion that I associate with that is anger. I'm angry at you. How can you get away with that? How will the world let you get away with that? And that's one of the emotions I said earlier that I had to work through, because I had that. And I had that anger. And then when I was letting everything go, I had enormous grief, like loss, grief, everything. And I had to work through that. That's what I mean. It's really complex. It's not just easy to say you forgive someone. There are all these pieces in that. And there's a huge piece. I'm so glad you brought that up. There's a huge piece around, but this isn't just, will I ever get justice? Am I going to be beholden for an eye for an eye? It makes the whole world blind, right? So I might not get justice, but what am I going to do with that? That's where I have my power. That's where I am empowered to choose. I can't choose about the past. I can't choose about resolution if that other person isn't available. I can choose to empower myself to move forward in this way through this process.
So really, forgiveness is not something we do for someone else. We do it for ourselves.
Yes, forgiveness is not something we do for someone else. We do it for ourselves.
Right. Oh, yeah, that's a powerful one. You alluded to this earlier about self-forgiveness, forgiveness of self. Can we talk a little bit more about that?
I went into the conversation that, why did this happen to me? I'm a certain kind of person that helps others and confident and all that stuff. And I think what I saw from the feedback I received on the book was that there were a lot of women confident women, powerful women who give away their power, and they don't see it happening. And I don't know that I can tell you why. For me, it was the longing that I had felt for so long that we talked about in another episode around my spiritual quest, and having this person make a compelling offer to be able to take me through that longing, to understand it, and to marry the secular and the sacred. That was just so compelling to me. But to forgive myself, I had to offer self-compassion and get out of the anger and grief. And that was my process. And the writing of the book was also a process. So this is a really interesting thing. I had a mentor when I was writing the book, and she said, you write well, but you're not in it. And I said, what do you mean I'm not in it? Well, I wrote it. And she said, no, you are emotionally distant. And I was like, I knew she was right.
Did you? So as soon as she said that to you, did that really land? Could you see that she was absolutely spot on? Right. Oh, gosh, that must have been hard.
I've been discovered.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So what did it make you do, though?
It made me go back into the grief and the anger that I had not resolved, that I thought I had resolved. But in order for me to actually write what I wrote and to bring all of my emotions to it, including the grief and the anger, and then the forgiveness part and the love part, which love plays a huge role in the book, and not human kind of love, but like love with a capital L kind of love. I could not have written the book if I hadn't gone through that. And she just called it out. And I realized that in the moment she asked me, I knew she was right. And I knew I was trying to protect my heart when I was writing. But her comment was, unless you go there, you will not write the book that you're supposed to write, and you will not affect readers. They will not understand your story. And I was like, oh, shoot, I'm going to have to go there.
I'm going to have to go there. And go there you did. I think she was spot on, because I think the depth of the emotion in the book is absolutely bloody incredible. I mean, it's an amazing, amazing read. I've got two last questions that I would love to put to you, Alicia. The first question is just thinking of the book in general. What is your greatest wish that your readers take from the book?
My greatest wish for the book is that particularly women understand that they are more courageous and resilient than they believe they are. And that through that resilience and that courage, they can reclaim their lives no matter what is challenging them. And I think that's how you transform something that's trauma into gold. You understand that you can be more courageous, more resilient, and there are ways that you can overcome really significant challenges. And you have to offer yourself a bit of self-compassion in order to do that as well.
Right. Absolutely. And the last question I want to ask you today is, what has changed for you inside because of this book, because of birthing this book?
The first thing I thought when you asked me that was, what's changed for me is I am at peace.
Oh my goodness.
I'm really, really at peace. I was able to reclaim my life. I was able to transmute a traumatic event into gold that also serves others. I have designed a life that is completely aligned to who I am in my true nature and allows me to do the things that I love to do, like writing or running retreats for people or helping people do life transitions or overcome their own challenges. So interestingly enough, in many ways, I think the relationship meeting up with a shaman was destined. I do believe that in destiny. I think that was destined. But what wasn't destined was, what was I going to do with it afterwards? And I think I want to be able to say to people, I'm walking my talk. I am modeling for you what is possible. And that for me is really important.
And that is exactly what you do. Well, I just want to thank you so much for sharing such insights, all of the personal insights you shared over this series. I'm excited to go live together soon. Like I say, I'll pop a link in the show notes for when that's going to be, and I'll make sure that everyone is notified of that. If you're listening to this podcast now, if you head to my website, thejillmoakes.com, there's lots of ways there that you can opt in and land on my email list so that we can share with you when that is going to be. But in the meantime, Alicia, just thank you so much. I've got so much out of doing this interview series with you. It's been wonderful. You're a dear friend. You are just an incredible woman. And it's just been such a privilege to be able to do this with you. Thank you.
Yeah. I thank you very much, because I didn't know it was going to happen, but through our conversations, I've actually processed a lot and made a lot more things distinct for myself. So I really appreciate your questions. Thanks.
You're so welcome. Bye for now. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that getting our heads together this week has filled your mind with what's possible. If you love the show, would you do me a massive favour, please? Would you leave a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts? It would really help me put more heads together, reach more ears and expand more minds. Until next week, bye for now.